This is Chapter 2 of The God Boy by Ian Cross. I know the difference between men and women, of course. Men have whatnots down below, but women haven't. On the other hand, women blow out up top, but men don't. Men and women can get married and have babies if they want to. Although Joe Waters used to argue that it was possible to be married without having babies, and that was what he was going to do. It wasn't that Joe didn't like babies, by the way. He didn't like what everybody said you had to do to get them. He reckoned he saw a man and a woman in the lupines down at the beach doing it, thinking that no one was around, and that it looked the silliest business in the world, unless you counted going down under the sea in a submarine. Joe always had a bee in his bonnet about submarines, too, for some reason, although he had never actually seen one. I mention this about men and women to show that I know what I'm talking about. With Mum and Dad now, they must have got married and had their children. There are two of us, by the way. I have a big sister named Molly. They must have had their children and changed their minds, and then it was too late. Why they changed their minds, I don't know, because both of them seemed alright. Mum was very bad-tempered and quiet towards the end, and Dad always did drink too much. But besides that, they were alright to me. At least when they were not together. Then, of course, everything seemed to come out of joint, even when they didn't have big rows. They'd always be nagging away at each other, sometimes when there didn't seem to be a need to, as for instance when Dad said at the tea table, "Bert and his wife are having a bit of a do over at their place on Saturday night. I don't suppose you want to go, eh?" "For goodness sake, no," said Mum. "I knew you'd take it like that. Here I am stuck in this god-forsaken dump, getting no fun out of life, and you won't even come out and help. Come on, eh? You can sit in a corner and glare at me the way you always do. That won't matter. You don't usually find it necessary to even bother with me." "Too right I don't. If you must know, Bert's wife was in the office, and she asked. It's a husband and wife affair, so I can't go without you. I'm past being humiliated by you in public, having to watch your drunken foolishness and everybody looking on. That's your evil mind, you know. You're heading for the rat house the way you talk, imagining things. I'm a very popular man, plenty of friends, and I can move in any circle, and I'm always a perfect gentleman, and I have plenty of friends, if it wasn't for you, and you talk about being humiliated by me. People think you are queer. That's what people think about you." That's the way they went on, ever since I could remember. Yet by themselves they were fine. Dad would help me fly kites and talk away to me, and Mum was really great. Somehow, I don't really blame them. I blame God. I have got a lot of ideas about God. I pray as much as anybody, even though I am tough. Yet I'm not too sure I like God. It seems to me that if he is what they say he has a very funny way of showing it. That's what gets me annoyed sometimes, and then I give him a piece of my mind. I don't go in for the soft soap all the time. I tell him what I think because he darn well knows it. Anyway, I'll be praying, as we all have to before class each morning with the nuns, and when I'm feeling anything but mealy-mouthed, I let him know. "Our Father, who art in heaven, you give me a pain in the neck," I'll say. It is just a feeling, and of course, I apologize usually when I feel better. Yet there is no hiding the fact that in some ways I am dissatisfied with God. There is an expression I read in a book that I shouldn't have been reading. I read everything I could get my hands on, though. And I like the way it sums up my feelings. The thin end of the purse. That's it. Looking back, I can't help thinking that I got the thin end of the purse. That's a boxing expression, by the way. And this from God, and me only little. He could have waited till I got bigger. Even now, it wouldn't be so bad, as I am in a better position. I should think that God should wait till children are over 12 at least before he starts swinging Sunday punches. That's another boxing expression. That's why I get annoyed with him, and occasionally I think that I will go after him. If people started a mutiny, not against the church, mind you, but against God, maybe he will sit up and take notice. I've always been interested in God. Don't mistake me about myself, though. A lot of good things happen to me, and they are what God could use in his defense. Raggleton was a nice place, down there by the sea, which roared quietly into your ear all the time, like a cat purring. All my life till I was taken away from there, I could stop at any time of the day and cock my head and hear that purring, and at night laying in bed, it was extra plain, blur, blur, blurring away, and that was the sound of the whole world. A kid in a place by the sea is lucky that way, being able to hear what is going on in the whole world. Not living by the sea is just the same as living underground, and not being able to see the sky. The sea is just as important as the sky, and now I often want to hear it, and yet I cannot accept from memory. We had a sermon once at church, and the priest said hell was like an ocean of fire. He was talking through his hat, going on like that, about every wave being red hot. Hell and the sea don't go together, and that is that. And there are lots of nice people by the sea. I used to sit and watch Bloody Jack for hours on the wharf. He'd sit there talking all the time to me when I was there, and the fish when I wasn't. He would be fishing, you understand, dirty and old and hot knobbly. He never shaved, yet he never really had a beard, half his face being covered by a black fuzzy mess that never grew into anything, one way or the other. And he'd natter away all the time and never catch many fish, mainly because he couldn't be bothered replacing his bait when he lost it. I don't know why we called him Bloody Jack. Sitting there on the wharf in those old clothes, near where the freezing works discharged the old blood and guts, you could smell it as well as see it in the water. And the sea, way on out there over the bar. He was a big friend of mine. "Young'un," he'd say, "a man might as well fish all the time and be done with it, especially if you've got a pension, because that's what we are all doing anyway." He'd go on like that, getting really involved, way over my head, about everybody was fishing for something, that being life. He was not all there upstairs, I suppose, yet the way he talked on in a growl was good. He could make noises with his stomach too, that were really amazing. Real control he had. Some days he would wriggle his stomach so that you could hear it a mile off. I would laugh at that. In his special show, he would finish a demonstration with a blow-off that you wouldn't believe was possible. You really wouldn't. It was so long and loud. He never would belch, though. "All expulsions of air should be from the lower bowel, boy," he said. "Don't forget that, and you'll never have a minute's trouble with your digestion." And then there were the regular fishermen, who would drop into Raggleton sometimes. They would always let you look over their boats and tell you about the sharks and whales and octopuses. I've actually seen dead sharks and octopuses. All those men were friendly and tough, and us boys respected them very much. The big man was Mike Venuti, who had 2 boats, and he would tell us about Italy, and he could sing like nobody's business, down there in the sun. It would be sissy for anybody else to sing like he did. Raggleton had this port, and the wharf, and the freezing works, which had a railway line running into the middle of it practically. And around the bend of the bay, behind the port and the town, everybody lived. The coast took a big curve there, and right back of the town was the sea again, hitting a big beach. A peninsula is the correct name for the place, and the county is actually called Peninsula County. So kids had the sea and the sand, and rocks under the cliffs at one end of the beach, where crabs and other shellfishes lived, as well as the normal things that kids have in living in a town. So I was lucky there. I bet our beach was the best place in the world for kids. The sea itself there was no place for sissies, as the breakers came in like rows of steamrollers and would flatten you if you didn't dive under or go with them. There was a long stretch of sand right down to the mole at the harbour entrance on one side and right up to the cliffs on the other. Behind there were great sand hills covered with lupin and marram grass, with a few pohutakawa trees here and there. There was actually a track through the lupins and around one of the hills that came out near the back of our place. So it was only a few minutes for me to get down to the beach. All the kids of Raggleton would play there because there was no limit on what you could do. For that matter, a lot of grown-ups used to mess around there too, especially the big boys and girls. Often during the summer, we kids would come across them laying around under the lupins, slopping over each other. On Sunday afternoon, my mother came out walking with me. I don't know why, and without actually telling her why, I got her to go down to the wharf, and as I knew he would be, old Bloody Jack was there, sitting alone and growling away as he spoke to the fish. I've heard him talking about books to fish. "Look who's with me," I called out that day as we got near Jack. He turned around and looked, hardly glancing at me, but staring at my mother. There was nothing special that day about her. She had an ordinary dress on, the spotted one with dots, I think. Yet he stared at her for a long time, then grunted and said nothing. He didn't say another word while we were there. It was remarkable that it was the only time I had ever heard him not talking. We were only there a minute or so because my mother wasn't very interested in where we were, and certainly didn't seem interested in Jack. And then she complained about the smell, so we went back up. I looked over my shoulder, and it wasn't till we were a fair way off that I could hear Jack starting to talk again. I tried to talk to my mother about Jack, and she didn't listen, so I gave up. I don't think she even knew I was interested in him, really. Jack never said anything to me about her coming down that day, and I never said anything to him either. With Mum not saying anything, it was a queer business all around.